Meanwhile, the negotiations for peace were proceeding very slowly, and Germany was still suffering. A young man, instigated by a blind feeling of patriotism, formed the design of delivering his country from him, whom he regarded as the cause of its misfortunes. He presented himself at Schönbrunn on the 23rd of October, while the troops were defiling. I was on duty. Napoleon was standing between the Prince de Neuchâtel and me. The young man, whose name was Staps, advanced to the emperor. Berthier, believing that he was about to present a petition, stepped forward and told him to deliver it to me. He replied that he wished to speak to Napoleon, but he was again told that if he had any communication to make, he must apply to the Aide-de-Camp on duty. He withdrew to a short distance, repeating that he would speak with Napoleon only. He came forward again and approached very near the person of the emperor. I drew him back and told him in German that he must withdraw, that if he had anything to solicit, he would be heard after the parade. His right hand was thrust into a side pocket under his greatcoat, and he held a paper, one end of which was visible. I was struck by the expression in his eyes when he looked at me. His determined manner roused my suspicions. I called to an officer of the gendarmerie who was on the spot and ordered him to be put under arrest and conducted to the castle. The attention of everyone present was so occupied with the parade that nobody noticed what was going forward. I was soon informed that a large carving knife had been found on Staps. I told Duroc what I had learned, and we went together to the place where he had been taken. We found him sitting on a bed, on which were laid the portrait of a young woman, a portfolio, and a purse containing a few old louis d'or. I asked his name. "I can tell it only to Napoleon," was his reply. "What did you intend to do with the knife that was found upon you?" "That I can tell only to Napoleon." "Did you propose to assassinate him?" "Yes, sir." "Why?" "That I can tell only to him." I went to communicate this singular circumstance to the emperor. He desired that the young man be conducted to his closet. I went out to give this order, and on my return, I found Bernadotte, Berthier, Savary, and Duroc with the emperor. Staps was brought in by 2 gendarmes, with his hands tied behind him. He appeared perfectly composed. The presence of Napoleon made not the least impression on him, but he saluted respectfully. The emperor asked him whether he could speak French, and he replied in a firm tone, "Very little." Napoleon then directed me to ask him, in his name, the following questions. "Where were you born?" "In Naumburg." "What is your father?" "A Protestant minister." "How old are you?" "I am 18 years of age." "What did you intend to do with the knife?" "To kill you." "You are mad, young man. You are an illuminato." "I am not mad, and I do not know what is meant by an illuminato." "You are sick, then." "I am not sick. On the contrary, I am in good health." "Why did you wish to assassinate me?" "Because you have caused the misfortunes of my country." "Have I done you any harm?" "You have done harm to me, as well as to all Germans." "By whom were you sent?" "Who instigated you to this crime?" "Nobody. I determined to take your life from the conviction that I should thereby render the highest service to my country and to Europe." "Is this the first time you ever saw me?" "I saw you at Erfurt, at the time of the interview." "Did you then intend to assassinate me?" "No. I thought that you would no longer wage war in Germany. I was then one of your most ardent admirers." "How long have you been in Vienna?" 10 days. "Why did you so long defer the execution of your design?" "I came to Schönbrunn a week ago, but the parade was over when I arrived, and I postponed the execution of my design until this day." "I tell you, you are either mad or sick. Neither the one nor the other. Send for Corvisart to come here. Who is Corvisart? He is a physician, I replied. I have no need of him. We remained silent until the doctor arrived. Staps evinced the utmost indifference. At length, Corvisart made his appearance. Napoleon directed him to feel the young man's pulse. Am I not quite well, sir? He is in very good health, said the doctor, addressing himself to the emperor. I told you so, said Staps, with an air of satisfaction. Napoleon was embarrassed by the offender's calm demeanor. You are a wild enthusiast, said he. You will ruin your family. I am willing to grant your life if you ask pardon for the crime which you intended to commit and for which you ought to be sorry. I want no pardon, replied Staps. I feel the deepest regret for not having executed my design. You seem to think very lightly of the commission of a crime. To kill you would not have been a crime, but a duty. Whose portrait is that which was found upon you? It is the portrait of a young lady to whom I am attached. She will be very much distressed to hear of the unhappy situation in which you are placed. She will regret to hear that I have not succeeded. She detests you no less than I do. Would you not be grateful were I to pardon you? I would, nevertheless, seize the first opportunity to take your life. Napoleon was confounded. He ordered the prisoner to be led away, and then entered into conversation with us, saying a great deal on the subject of the Illuminati. In the evening, he sent for me and said, "The circumstance that occurred today is very extraordinary. The plots of Berlin and Weimar are at the bottom of this affair. I repelled these suspicions. Women are capable of anything," resumed Napoleon. "Neither man nor woman connected with those two courts," I replied, "would ever conceive the idea of so atrocious a crime. Recollect the affair of Schill. It bears no resemblance to a crime like this." "You may say what you please, General, but I know I am no favorite, either at Berlin or Weimar." "That is very true. You cannot reasonably expect to be a favorite at either of those courts, but because they dislike you, does it follow that they would assassinate you?" He communicated the same suspicions to others. Napoleon ordered me to write to General Lauer, directing him to interrogate Staps with the view of obtaining some confession from him, but he made none. He persisted in asserting that he had acted entirely from the impulse of his own mind, and not from the instigation of anyone. The departure from Schönbrunn was fixed for the 27th of October. Napoleon rose at 5 in the morning and sent for me. We walked out to the great road to see the Imperial Guard pass along on its departure for France. We were alone. Napoleon again spoke to me of Staps. "That a young man of his age," said he, "a German, a Protestant, and well educated, should attempt the commission of such a crime, is a thing unparalleled. Inquire how he died." A heavy fall of rain obliged us to return from our walk. I wrote to General Lauer, requesting that he would give us an account of the last moments of Staps. He informed me that the prisoner had been executed at 7 in the morning of the 27th, that he had taken no sustenance since the 24th, that food had been offered to him, but that he had constantly refused it, because, as he said, he had sufficient strength to walk to the place of execution. He was informed that peace was concluded, and this intelligence seemed to agitate him. His last words were, "Liberty forever, Germany forever, death to the tyrant." I delivered the report to Napoleon. He desired me to keep the knife that had been found upon the criminal. It is still in my possession. Napoleon informed me that the preliminaries of the peace were not yet signed, but that the articles of the treaty were all drawn up, and that it would be ratified at Munich, where we were to stop. We arrived at Nymphenburg. The court of Bavaria was residing there at the time. I had not had the honor of seeing the king since the campaign of Austerlitz. He lodged me in his palace and gave me many proofs of his confidence and kindness. He described to me the unhappy situation of his subjects and added that, if another state of things were not speedily established, he should be obliged to put the key under the door and set off. These were the expressions he used. I bore this last conversation in mind, for I was determined to report it, not with the view of injuring the king, but for the sake of proving to Napoleon that all the indemnities which he granted to his allies were far from satisfying them and compensating for the burdens imposed on them by the war. Peace was ratified. We left Nymphenburg and arrived at Stuttgart. Napoleon was received in a style of magnificence and was lodged in the palace, together with all his suite. The king was laying out a spacious garden, and men who had been condemned to the galleys were employed to labor in it. The emperor asked the king who the men were who worked in chains. He replied that they were, for the most part, rebels who had been taken in his new possessions. We set out on the following day. On the way, Napoleon alluded to the unfortunate wretches whom he had seen at Stuttgart. "The King of Württemberg," said he, "is a very harsh man, but he is very faithful. Of all the sovereigns in Europe, he possesses the greatest share of understanding." We stopped for an hour at Rastatt, where the Princes of Baden and Princess Stephanie had arrived for the purpose of paying their respects to the Emperor. The Grand Duke and Duchess accompanied him as far as Strasbourg. On his arrival in that city, he received dispatches which again excited his displeasure against the Faubourg Saint-Germain. We proceeded to Fontainebleau. No preparations had been made for the Emperor's reception. There was not even a guard on duty. But shortly after, the whole court arrived, as well as the different members of Napoleon's family. The emperor had several long conferences with the minister of police. He complained of the Faubourg Saint-Germain. The contrast of humility and boldness, alternately displayed by the old nobility, in the antechambers and salons, disconcerted him. He could scarcely conceive that these men were so base and perfidious as to destroy with one hand while they solicited favors with the other. He appeared inclined to severity, but Fouché dissuaded him from that course. "It is a traditionary remark," said he, "that the Seine flows, the Faubourg intrigues, solicits, devours, and calumniates. This is in the order of nature. Everything has its attributes." Napoleon yielded. He avenged himself only on men. It was proposed that he should make a solemn entry into the capital, but this he declined. The conqueror of the world was superior to the triumphs which transported the Romans. On the following day, the court left Fontainebleau. The emperor rode to Paris without stirrups. He outstripped all his escort. None but a chasseur of the guard was able to keep up with him. In this manner, he arrived at the Tuileries. Napoleon was now approaching one of the most important epochs of his life. The imperial divorce was publicly spoken of in Paris, but opinions varied with regard to the choice of the future empress. The princesses of Russia and Saxony and the Archduchess of Austria were talked of. The Russian alliance first became the subject of consideration. Monsieur de Metternich learned this and made overtures which were accepted. All the members of the imperial family were, however, averse to the Austrian alliance. They dreaded the subtlety of the Vienna court and foresaw that it would consent and lend itself to anything the emperor might require, until a favorable opportunity should occur when the mask would be thrown off and Austria would be foremost in bringing about his ruin. But the marriage was determined on, and remonstrances were useless. I was appointed to be present at the ceremony. This was no trifling favor, for a great part of the court was obliged to mingle with the crowd. I must confess, however, that I had no right to expect it, as I had indulged in some reflections on the divorce, which had been reported to the emperor. I felt for Josephine, who had always proved herself amiable, simple, and unassuming. She was banished to Malmaison. I frequently visited her, and she made me the confidant of her sorrows. I have seen her weep for hours together. She spoke of her attachment for Bonaparte, for so she used to call him in our presence. She regretted the close of her splendid career. This was very natural. The day after the marriage, We received orders to attend and make the 3 bows to the imperial couple who were seated on the throne. I could not obey the summons, being confined by a headache, which attacks me pretty regularly every week. I sent to inform the Grand Marshal of this circumstance. Napoleon did not believe I was unwell. He thought I was unwilling to submit to the etiquette, and he was therefore displeased with me. He gave orders that I should return to Danzig. The Duc de Feltre met me on the boulevards and communicated to me the Emperor's intentions. I applied for instructions. Napoleon answered dryly that I had only to keep watch over Prussia, to treat the Russians with respect, and to give an account of what was going on in the ports of the Baltic, adding that I might dispense with passing through Berlin. I stayed a few days at Strasbourg and Frankfurt, and arrived on the 10th of June at Danzig. I was very well received by the troops and the inhabitants. They complained very much of General Grabowski. The Danzigers did not like him, but they were in the wrong. He was an excellent man. The garrison was soon increased. It received an augmentation of Saxon, Baden, Württemberg, Westphalian, and Hessian troops. They formed a complete army. This increase of force displeased me, because it imposed a heavy burden on the citizens. For my own part, I had no reason to complain. The sentiments of the troops were by no means equivocal, and their respective sovereigns, with but few exceptions, seized that opportunity of assuring me of their goodwill. I shall content myself with the insertion of the King of Bavaria's letter. Munich, April 15th, 1811. My dear Rapp, you are about to have my 14th Regiment of Infantry under your command. I recommend it to your kindness and attention. The colonel is a brave man who will fulfill his duty. The lieutenant colonel and the 2 majors are valuable men, as are all the officers of the regiment. The troops are excellent and in good condition. They are very well pleased, my dear General, to be placed under the command of an officer like you, and moreover, a native of Alsace. Address yourself directly to me whenever you may have anything to communicate relative to the welfare of my troop, if you have any complaint to make, or if it fails in the discharge of its duty, a circumstance which I hope will not occur. I eagerly seize this opportunity, my dear Rapp, to repeat to you the assurance of my constant friendship. Maximilian Joseph. I received instructions to close the port of the town and to watch those of Prussia. Davout came to take the command of Hamburg. I was not under his orders, but I was to correspond with him and with Monsieur de Saint-Marsan. Though I was not acquainted with the latter gentleman, yet I esteemed him greatly. His letters proved him to be a worthy man who was desirous of seeing harmony restored between the 2 nations. This was also my wish. Our opinions perfectly agreed. Napoleon's advisers frequently wrote to advise me not to place confidence in that diplomatist, whom they described as a traitor sold to King Friedrich William and his ministers. They doubtless wrote to the same effect to Napoleon. But fortunately, when that prince had once formed his opinion with respect to any individual, he paid little attention to the reports that were addressed to him. Nothing short of finding him, as Napoleon himself expressed it, with his hand in his pocket, could induce him to withdraw his confidence. My situation, however, became disagreeable. On the one side, the Danzigers complained of the maintenance of the troops, of the burdens that were imposed upon them, and of being deprived of their trade. On the other, the ministers urged me to collect the contributions in order to meet the expenses of a secret expedition and the extension of the fortifications. The contractors threatened to stop the supplies. I knew not what to do. I derived some funds from the taxes raised on Prussia, but these were insufficient. However, by dint of perseverance and representations, I succeeded in obtaining the sums necessary for paying the supplies, and by degrees the town was relieved from that burden. Funds were assigned to me for completing the fortifications and making the necessary preparations for the secret expedition, which, however, was no longer a secret. The French ministers once proposed to Napoleon to have the garrison maintained by the Prussian government. A letter was written to me for my advice on this subject, and I replied that if ever such a determination should be entered into, I would immediately quit Danzig, in spite of every consideration. I must do justice to Marshal Davout, who was likewise consulted in this business. He showed that the measure was dangerous and impracticable. The idea was abandoned. I cannot pass over in silence a strange misunderstanding in which I became involved at Danzig. I gave a dinner to which I invited the Prussian and Russian residents. I placed the former on my right hand and the latter on my left. The Russian resident took offense at this arrangement. He imagined I intended to affront him, the Russian court, and all the Russians in the world. He complained of my conduct, and his complaint was transmitted from St. Petersburg to Monsieur de Champagny, who communicated it to Napoleon. I was blamed. I was said to have been wanting in the respect due to the resident of a great nation in assigning the post of honor to the resident of Prussia, and I was called upon to make reparation for the error I had committed. I confess I felt hurt at this. My reply to the minister was that I did not give diplomatic dinners, that the foreign consuls were not accredited with the governor, but with the Senate, that I might place beside me at my own table whomsoever I pleased, that I conceived the complaints of the resident to be ridiculous, and that I would not receive him again. I kept my word, and here the affair ended. I consider it proper to relate this anecdote, because it proves the attempts which were making even at that period to conciliate the good graces of Russia. That concludes the 7th part of the story. Thank you very much for listening. Please subscribe for more episodes and leave a comment.